During the exam, she felt something nobody in that room expected. And what happened next stunned the entire hospital. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon polish. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and impartial. A monitor's soft, patient beep stitched itself into the background, along with the distinct murmur of a hospital PA announcement and the occasional cartwheel squeaking down the hall. In the center, beneath the bright gaze of the ceiling, a small girl sat in a wheelchair, Emily. Her hands rested in her lap. Her eyes tracked people the way a bird watches passing cars, curious but wary, measuring whether the faces would meet hers or glide past. Outside the exam door, beyond the thin sheet of privacy glass, Daniel moved with the practiced economy of someone who had learned to carry the world gently. He pushed a mop bucket along the corridor, the rubber wringer chattering rhythmically. His jacket's hem showed a threadbare patch at the elbow. His boots had scuffs the color of long winters. From his pocket hung a folded, faded handkerchief, white but flecked with time, a small square of cloth that had become a talisman. He smelled faintly of lemon and coffee. When he stopped, he wiped his hand on that handkerchief, a tiny ritual that tethered him to mornings when his wife was still alive, and the kitchen table had been noisy with children and plans. Daniel's daughter, Lily, sat on a bench nearby, legs swinging, playing with a toy train she'd balanced atop a hospital magazine. Lily's laughter was like a light someone had left on in a dark house. She was a living proof for Daniel of why he worked the night shifts and took whatever hours the hospital could give him. He had once been an engineer. In another life, he had spent long days designing systems meant to make life easier for a lot of people. After Sarah, his wife, got sick and then passed away, something in him folded inward and rerouted. The same hands that had once sketched blueprints now wiped surfaces and guided visitors to rooms. He never spoke of his old work. He never wore the past like a banner. But the handkerchief in his pocket smelled of that other life. The perfume Sarah liked, a faint trace of solder in lunch, a memory stored in cotton. Up on the hospital mezzanine, behind a glass balustrade and under softer lights, a woman watched. Victoria Lane had learned to watch the world closely, out of habit and out of necessity. She was used to reading rooms like open books, reading the numbers of the day, scanning faces for risk and opportunity, deciding what needed attention and what could be delegated. She had risen through boardrooms and press rooms, a name in the headlines for an unflinching mind and an empire that bore her initials. Where others saw metrics, she saw patterns. Her jawline was calm, her hands were steady. She had brought Emily here often, propelled her through instructions and therapy and consultations, believing a steady schedule and well-funded care would buy her daughter the largest possible share of normal. But Victoria had also learned a difficult thing about motherhood in the public eye. Money could buy equipment and therapists and lessons in how to navigate buildings, but money did not always buy privacy from the world's looks. She watched the girl she loved watch the room, felt the soft contraction in her chest that came from knowing people could be cruel and thoughtless. That contraction had become a private ache she carried beneath her suits. The nurse called the next name, and footsteps shuffled. Voices whispered in the waiting room. That whispering was the place where judgment lived, small, vicious, often disguised as concern. A man in a suit, 2 sizes too large, face red from the heat outside, leaned in conspiratorially to his companion and made a moo. "Poor thing," he said under his breath, not loud enough for anyone to confront him, but loud enough for Emily to hear. A teenager in scrubs on her phone tutted and passed a comment out loud, an observation wrapped in pity. A woman with a stroller gave Emily a long, searching look that was equal parts curiosity and unease. No one meant to be cruel, most of them were simply not thinking. And in that inattention laid a kind of cruelty that stung, the subtle daily erasure that tells someone they are not the center of other people's day. Emily's shoulders tightened. She kept her eyes politely low, the way a long-accustomed island tends to lower itself to avoid storms. The therapist in the room ran through an assessment, a list of movements and reactions, clinical measures, checkboxes. The room was all procedure and professional patience. The therapist's voice was steady and kind, but it had the polite distance of someone trained to remain impartial. She asked Emily to reach for a toy, to push her foot against resistance, to smile on cue. Emily tried. The words she offered as answers were small things, short sounds that worked like seatbelts for the moment. Daniel paused with his mop at the doorway and looked through the glass. He did not mean to linger. He was on duty. Duty meant moving, and there were rooms to be cleaned. But he watched because his heart gave him margin.
He saw the way the other visitors angled away, how their eyes skimmed over Emily like reading text in a foreign language. He saw the way the therapist's professional gaze measured and recorded, but did not linger in wonder. He remembered Sarah's voice, soft, firm, telling him once, years ago when their daughter was small and scraped her knee, "Make people feel seen, Daniel. That is worth more than 1,000,000 words." It wasn't an instruction to interfere, it was a call to notice. He could have kept walking. He could have spent the rest of his shift with the mop bucket echoing the door.
He was paid to be invisible in a way, cleaning, tidying, passing through rooms like a whisper. Service workers learned to move that way for the comfort of others. But that day, the memory of Sarah settled on his shoulders like a small duty, heavier than work. Do not let a child sit in the middle of a room and be counted out of the world. If this already matters to you, stay with me. There is a moment coming that changed how people in that hospital would look at each other. He stepped in. Daniel did not march in. He opened the door as if entering someone's living room, quietly, respectfully. The therapist looked up, a polite surprise crossing her features. There was a small professional exchange, Daniel's voice low and unassuming. "Excuse me, is it all right if I wheel her into the atrium for a minute? The sun's on." The therapist blinked, measuring protocols and time and the chart. A pause stretched like a little hinge. Then she nodded, probably thinking of nothing more complicated than fresh air and a short break. 10 minutes, she said. "We'll be here if you need us." Daniel eased the wheelchair forward. He did not rush. He talked to Emily in a voice pitched to be unthreatening and gentle, a voice that had invented countless lullabies for Lily at bedtime. He told her the same small truths he told his daughter. "We're going to feel the sun. It's warm today." He let the handkerchief rest, folded in his palm like a promise. They moved down the hall. The hospital corridor was a secret geography of small sounds, the tap of a shoe heel, the muted roar of an elevator, a vending machine's mechanical sigh. As they approached the atrium, a wide space with high windows, the light changed, filtered through glass, softened by leaves of potted ficus, a rectangle of sun breaking up the gray of the corridor like a coin on the ground. A handful of visitors lingered nearby, nursing cups of coffee, staring at their phones. The atrium smelled faintly of lemon and spilled coffee. Daniel eased Emily into the sunlit center, where the light pooled like warm tea. He did not move like a savior. He moved like someone setting a place at a table. He gave her space. He turned the wheelchair so that the light warmed the side of her face, and then, without affectation, he did something that the room had not expected. He took the handkerchief from his pocket and unfolded it. It was not the gesture of a man who wanted credit. It was a practical, human motion. He wiped a smudge from Emily's sleeve, the kind of absent, attentive movement parents and caretakers do without thinking. The cloth was soft and familiar. It smelled faintly of lemon and of memories, of Sarah's laugh, of Sunday mornings. Emily blinked at the scent, and something like surprise moved across her face. Then Daniel lifted the handkerchief again and draped it across Emily's shoulders like a small cape, joking quietly that it would make her the fastest girl in the atrium. The joke was not grand. It landed like a pebble in a still pond. Emily's mouth turned, searching for a laugh, and found one. The laugh was not the loud, cinematic howl of miraculous joy. It was a short, incredulous giggle, the kind that makes a nurse glance up and then smile in spite of herself. The bystanders reacted. Some eyes narrowed, others softened. The man in the too large suit made a small, uncomfortable sound, as if he'd been asked to reckon with his own unkind thought. The teenager lowered his phone, a frown of apology passing across his face. The woman with the stroller shifted, and for the first time in the morning, she looked not at a curiosity, but at another human being. What Emily felt in that moment was nothing technical. It was not the result of therapy or medication. It was not a measure with a chart. It was a sensation of being seen in an uncomplicated human way, a stranger noticing her, not as an object to wonder at, but as someone whose small pleasures mattered.
The handkerchief's texture was a thread connecting her to someone else's history. The warmth of the sun on her cheek and the careful, ordinary attention made the rest of the world recede, a softening of edges. It was, in its simplicity, a repair. A name rose in her throat, a small private thing. "Thank you," she breathed, surprised at how the words fit. When Victoria saw the shift, something in her tightened and then loosened. She had watched 1,000 clinical procedures and meetings where people carried themselves like calibrated instruments. She had seen hands reaching across conference tables to shake hands, to secure deals. She knew what it meant to be seen as an asset or as a problem to be solved, and she knew the value of being acknowledged for what one was, unvarnished. Watching Daniel, this janitor who moved like a man who had once been taught to measure load and balance, and then had repurposed those skills into care, tuck that faded handkerchief over a little girl's shoulders, was like watching a small truth make itself visible. She recognized him then, not in some movie reveal, but in a quiet way that felt like a fuse lighting in her mind. Years ago, her company had contracted an engineer to help design certain patient flow systems. She had read his name in margins of proposals, Daniel Ward. Had he been that same Daniel? She could not and should not have known the details, but there it was, something familiar in the way he moved, an economy of motion that spoke of someone who knew both machines and people. Her private life had been spent buying the best of everything. Her public life had been spent justifying production and budgets. But she had not thought to look for the kind of person who would give away the small dignity of a sunlit moment. She descended from the mezzanine not with a dramatic march, but because she could not move. The glass balustrade made a faint clink under her palm. Her shoes whispered on the tile as she reached the atrium.
People turned toward her, polite recognition giving way to an awareness that something was about to be named. Victoria's voice did not aim to humiliate. She stood a polite distance away and spoke in a measured way that did what bold faces cannot. It reframed the room. "I've been watching you," she said to the small cluster without accusation, only a clarity that unsettled more than any rebuke. "I've been watching the girl everyone thinks they understand, and the man who decided she deserved a little normal." Her eyes fell on Daniel. When she spoke his name to someone else, introducing him like a fact that needed stating, the air changed. "That is Daniel Ward." The murmurs stopped. People who had been making little jokes or glances paused as if someone had held up a mirror. For those who had been careless, it felt like a small unmasking. A woman who had been whispering to her companion felt the heat of embarrassment creep up her neck and, without thinking, offered a short apology. A teenager who had smirked put his phone away and had the humility to wipe his throat. A nurse who'd been quietly proud of maintaining professional distance found herself face to face with the fact that treatment charts and empathy were not mutually exclusive. Victoria did not go on about his resume. She did not brandish his past like a trophy. Instead, she did a different thing. She described, simply and precisely, the value of the action. "It takes nothing to pity someone," she said, voice cool and clear. "It takes something to notice them." Mr. Ward just gave someone the chance to be a child in the middle of what had become an adult room. It was not a plea. It was a statement that landed with the force of truth. Some people in the atrium blinked and then offered small, sheepish nods. Others, older and more hardened, let the moment slide. Old habits hold. At the center of the small scene, Emily's smile deepened. She reached out and placed her small hand on Daniel, and then, with the brave directness of children, traced the edge of his handkerchief. "It smells like your house," she said, and then left, the sound tiny and luminous. Lily, who had wandered closer with her toy train, joined the tableau with the unencumbered boldness of children. She clambered up on the low window bench and offered her train in barter. "Here, Emily, choo-choo." The exchange was uncomplicated. Two small girls, different histories, same present, shared a sunbeam. A woman who had been watching from her seat with a coffee cup now fished in her purse for bills and in a quick motion handed them to a volunteer coordinator nearby without fanfare. The volunteer accepted, shook her head, and smiled. "It's okay," she said, but the woman's eyes were bright with something like contrition and wonder. A man who had been scanning his emails reserved a seat for a visibly shaken mother and helped her open a door, a tiny restitution for a small thought earlier. The ripple began. Someone recorded a few seconds on a phone. Not a calculated smear or bait for clicks, just a clip. A faded handkerchief, a child laughing, a woman with a company name in her email signature who had come down from the mezzanine to name the thing happening as human. The clip traveled, as clips do, into places beyond the atrium. It landed not as spectacle, but as a quiet example. People wrote comments about the smallness of the kindness. People, surprised by their own tears, shared it for friends. The hospital's PR line did not orchestrate the spread. It was a moment the internet found believable because it had no artifice. But the viral reach was not the point. For Daniel, it was embarrassingly sudden and not something he sought. He had always hesitated at attention. He preferred anonymity like a coat. He found himself blinking under the sympathetic gaze of strangers and the cautious admiration of staff who suddenly saw a history they hadn't known was there. After the gathered visitors dispersed, after the small buzz died down to ordinary hospital murmurs, Victoria asked if she could speak to him. They took a seat near the atrium plants, in a quiet pocket where sun and shade met like friendly neighbors. Daniel sat with his hands folded. The handkerchief lay across his knee, an everyday relic. He did not know what to expect. Gratitude, perhaps, and then a return to the steady hum of his workday. Victoria studied him not as a business case, but as a parent, as a woman who had seen how children could be saved by minute gestures. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," he answered, "but she shouldn't have to ask for it either." She looked at him with an absence of the dramatic posture she used in other rooms. There was a vulnerability there she did not often show, a parent's confession. "I thought," she began, and then stopped, as if searching for a sentence that did not make the moment less gentle. "I thought I could buy experiences for her. I thought if I surrounded her with the right professionals and the right equipment and the right schedules, I would have done my job as a mother. But I didn't think to give her this, a small, ordinary thing that proved someone looked at her and liked what they saw." Daniel's laugh was a short, surprised noise. "It's not something to buy," he said. "My wife always said the same, that people want to be noticed more than anything." The conversation shifted. Victoria spoke of the tiredness that power carries, the need to solve and shield and plan, and of how easy it had been to assume that systems could do the heavy lifting. She admitted that there were things her money and her reach had not touched. Daniel spoke of his own modest life, of Lily and her train, and the quiet evenings he kept to make sure she fell asleep to a story rather than worry. "You didn't come here to be thanked," Victoria said, "and yet I want to, for what you did, for how you did it." "I didn't do anything heroic," Daniel replied. "I'm someone who gets to clean part of this place. I get to see things up close. You start to learn what people need. Sometimes it's a mop bucket. Sometimes it's a minute of being sunlit." They spoke about the nature of dignity, about how often it is mistaken for charity. "Dignity is not about what you give someone," Victoria said. "It's about what you honor in them." The hospital staff later came by with warm cookies and a small thank you card signed by coworkers. Some nurses, moved by what they had seen, began an informal conversation about how they might make space in therapy sessions for normal moments, like feeling sunlight or spinning slowly in a wheelchair, things that clinical notes do not always reflect, but that are crucial to a child's sense of self. A doctor mentioned, half in jest and half in earnest, including an Aesthetics of Dignity module in staff orientation. The clip of Emily laughing and Daniel draping the handkerchief became one more item among 1,000 things people watched and forgot. But for a surprising number of viewers, it stuck. People wrote about their own memories of someone small noticing them. A young mother commented that she had been saving for a new therapy device when someone's comment on the clip made her realize that the time she spent talking to her child was as valuable as any purchase. An elderly man wrote that he too had once been overlooked, and the clip reminded him of how ordinary gratitude could change the arc of a day. There were quieter consequences as well. A woman who had been unusually sharp with Emily in earlier months wrote an email to the hospital volunteer coordinator, apologizing and offering to volunteer for an hour every week. She said she wanted to learn what it meant to sit with a child without pitying them, to offer normal time. The hospital did not issue a press release about changing its culture, but hallways were different in small ways. A receptionist learned a new way to call names so they sounded less like diagnoses and more like invitations. A volunteer carried an extra blanket in her cart because she saw how small gestures could matter. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his shift and Lily returned to her train. In the evening, he tucked Lily into bed, reading by a lamp that smelled like old paper. He told her the story of the day with the kind of detail that makes memories a shared thing. His hand on the wheelchair, the sun like a gold coin, the way Emily laughed when the handkerchief smelled like someone's kitchen. Lily asked about the woman who had come down from the mezzanine. "Was she mad at you?" she asked, as if justice must always be loud. "No," Daniel said. "She was surprised, that's all."
Sometimes people just need time to be surprised. They both fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof. It was ordinary. It was enough. Victoria, for her part, found herself pausing in meetings, noticing faces in the same way she had noticed the atrium that day.
She adjusted a schedule for a child's therapy bed to accommodate a parent's work hours, not as a favor, but as an attempt to make home life possible. She called a small local nonprofit and asked about volunteer opportunities, not from a place of patronage, but because she wanted to learn how to be present in a different way. She sent a handwritten card to the family Daniel had lost, a small gesture that felt both too late and necessary. People noticed that she softened in ways colleagues commented on, not in speeches, but in the little ways she took meetings differently. Months later, when the winter sun tilted and the atrium light flickered through a different angle of glass, Emily and Lily were playing in the space with a care coordinator, building something out of foam blocks and laughter. There were no cameras, no agenda, just two girls choosing to stack pieces and topple them on purpose. Their feet pounded on the tiled floor, and a janitor walked by, whistling softly as he pushed a cart. He tipped his hat at them the way someone tips a hat to hope. Someone who had once shrugged at visible difference sat on a bench nearby and watched the two girls. She had volunteered. She had learned to look. Her gaze had changed because she had been compelled to see what she had avoided. It was small, quiet work, an accumulation of small clocks, and yet it mattered. The hospital did not become a utopia overnight. People continued to be thoughtless sometimes, and they sometimes apologized when they were finally confronted with their thoughtlessness. But the small moment in the atrium became a story the staff told when someone joined the team about how a worn handkerchief taught a room to refocus. It became less a viral sensation and more a quiet legend, the kind of story people told around long shifts to remind themselves why they had chosen this work. One evening, as snow began to fall in a hush that muffled the city, Victoria invited Daniel and Lily to a quiet dinner at a small cafe near the hospital, a meeting without press, without fanfare, just human logistics. They shared food and stories. She listened to the old engineers' tales about systems and patience, and the funny way engineers sometimes talk about symmetry, as if it were a personality trait. Daniel listened to Victoria speak about the strain of constant decisions, about the weight of wanting the right things for a child. They found in each other not a rescuer and someone rescued, but common people who had both stumbled into parenthood and learned from it. When they left, Emily with her wheelchair tucked back into a car, Daniel walked to his truck and paused. He pulled the handkerchief from his pocket and unfolded it in his palms. It was still faintly lemony. He touched its edge, and then, quickly, pressed it to his lips, an absent kiss to Sarah's memory. He put it back in his pocket and started the engine. At home, Lily greeted him at the door and slid her small hand into his. "Did you see how she smiled?" she asked, eyes bright as the train she had played with earlier. Daniel nodded. He put his arm around her and they walked into the modest apartment together, the ordinary kind of family, made of rice and laughter and bedtime stories. It is tempting to make the arc of moments like these into a moral test. Do this and the world will change. But reality is messier. The world did not change because of one clip on a phone. The world shifted because a handful of people learned to look again. And, crucially, because some of them made a small decision to behave differently the next time. Daniel's gesture did not cure anything. It did not rewrite charts or guarantee a better prognosis. What it did, and what it is allowed to do, is to create openings where dignity could enter. It taught people in that building that the small currency of kindness has real purchasing power. It buys belonging, it opens doors, it allows people to be more themselves in spaces that had previously turned them into problems to be solved. There is an image that stayed with a number of people, Emily's little hand pinching the edge of the handkerchief as if to keep hold of the memory. That same hand later helped push a small ball into Lily's palm, and Lily, in return, let the train rumble over a card table with a mock chug. The two children built a short, teetering bridge of blocks and then laughed when it collapsed. It was not symbolic, it was play. And in its ordinary clatter, it was a kind of proof. Small, human delight matters. If you find something in this that sits with you, an urge to notice someone, to speak a name, to offer a quiet, ordinary kindness, then perhaps that is enough. There is no need to wait for a camera or an audience. A handkerchief, a sunlight, a word, These are available currencies. They cost little and buy far more than money ever could. If you believe kindness can rewrite any story, subscribe and share this moment.